Millionaire sees his daughter, humiliated in a restaurant by rich kids. Look what he did the next day. The Golden Crown restaurant shone like a jewel in the heart of the city. Its enormous windows reflected the lights of the night, while inside, the tinkling of crystal glasses and the murmur of sophisticated conversations created an atmosphere of exclusivity. It was the place where the elite gathered to see and be seen, where the most important business deals were closed over linen tablecloths, and where appearances were everything. Jack Thornton, a businessman whose reputation preceded his arrival, entered the restaurant with a firm step. His impeccable suit and elegant bearing caught the attention of the diners, but what really stood out was the small figure accompanying him. Emma, his 8-year-old daughter, walked beside him with a grace uncommon for her age, her blue silk dress swaying gently with each step. "Good evening, Mr. Thornton," greeted the maitre d' with an exaggerated bow. "Your table is ready, as always." Jack nodded with a courteous gesture and guided Emma to their usual table, located in a privileged corner of the restaurant. As they walked, several heads turned to observe them. Some faces showed admiration, others envy, and a few poorly disguised curiosity. "Dad, why are they looking at us so much?" Emma whispered, slightly squeezing her father's hand. Jack leaned towards her with a warm smile. "Because you're the most beautiful girl in the place, my princess, and because your dad is a very important man." Emma nodded, although her eyes reflected a wisdom beyond her years, as if she understood that there was something more to those looks than simple admiration. Once seated, Jack looked at his daughter with pride. It had been too long since they had had a dinner like this, just the two of them. The last few months had been a whirlwind of meetings, business trips, and corporate decisions that had kept him away from what really mattered. "What would you like to eat, Emma?" he asked, handing her the menu with special illustrations for children. Emma examined it seriously, as if she were making the most important decision of her life. Can I order the pasta with truffle sauce?" Jack chuckled softly. "Of course you can. I'm glad to see you're developing a refined palate." Just as they were about to call the waiter, Jack's phone vibrated in his pocket. He frowned when he saw the name on the screen. "I'm sorry, honey, I have to take this call. It's very important. Will you be okay alone for a few minutes?" Emma nodded with maturity. "Sure, Dad. Don't worry about me." Jack stood up, giving her a quick kiss on the forehead before walking away to a quieter corner of the restaurant to take the call. He didn't realize that in doing so, he was leaving his little daughter exposed to the curious and, in some cases, malicious gazes of the other diners. While Jack discussed the details of a $1 million merger, Emma was left alone at the table, swinging her legs that didn't reach the floor. It was then that she noticed a group of children, not much older than her, were watching her from a nearby table. Their giggles and sidelong glances made Emma shrink a little in her seat. "Look at the little princess," whispered one of the boys, loud enough for Emma to hear. "I bet she doesn't even know how to use the cutlery properly. Her dad probably brought her out of pity," added a girl with an ostentatious bow in her hair. "Everyone knows Mr. Thornton prefers business to his family." Emma felt her eyes fill with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She remembered the words her mother used to say before she died. Thornton always maintains composure, no matter the situation. So, with a willpower unusual for her age, Emma straightened in her seat and pretended not to hear the cruel comments. When Jack returned to the table, he didn't immediately notice the change in his daughter's demeanor. He was too excited about the deal he had just closed. "Excellent news, Emma. I just secured a deal that—" He stopped short when he saw the expression in Emma's eyes. There was something there, a shadow of sadness and determination that hadn't been present before. "What's wrong, honey? Did something happen while I was gone?" Emma shook her head, forcing a smile. "No, Dad, everything's fine. You were telling me about your call?" Jack hesitated for a moment, his paternal instinct alerting him that something wasn't right. But before he could inquire further, the waiter arrived to take their order. The dinner continued, with Jack making efforts to cheer Emma up, and her responding with a silent bravery that hid the pain of the words she had heard. What neither of them knew was that this night would mark the beginning of a profound change in their lives. The unspoken words and invisible wounds would sow the seeds of events that would shake not only the Thornton family, but the entire high society of the city. Meanwhile, at the surrounding tables, the adults continued with their banal conversations, oblivious to the small drama that had unfolded among their children, and Jack, still unaware, was about to embark on a path that would test not only his love for Emma, but also his own values and his place in the world he had helped build. The days following the dinner at the Golden Crown passed with apparent normalcy for the Thornton family. Jack continued with his usual routine of meetings and negotiations, while Emma attended her exclusive private school. However, beneath the surface of this everyday life, a silent but profound change was brewing. Jack couldn't get the image of Emma that night at the restaurant out of his head. Although she hadn't said anything, her eyes, always expressive, told a story of contained pain. This realization tormented him, making him question every decision he had made in recent years. One afternoon, while reviewing some documents in his home office, he heard a muffled sob coming from Emma's room. Without thinking twice, Jack got up from his desk and headed there. He stopped in front of the door, decorated with butterflies and stars, hesitating for a moment before knocking. Softly, "Emma, can I come in, sweetheart?" There was no immediate response, just the sound of hurried movement. When he finally heard a weak, "Yes, Dad," Jack carefully opened the door. Emma was sitting on her bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and with an open book on her lap. Her eyes were slightly reddened, but she maintained a serene expression, almost too composed for a girl her age. "What's wrong, Princess? Are you okay?" asked Jack, sitting on the edge of the bed. Emma nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, Dad, I was just reading a sad story." Jack looked at the book, recognizing it as one of the fairy tale books he had given her himself. He knew that no story there could provoke the kind of pain he had heard in that sob. "Emma," he began, carefully choosing his words, "you know you can tell me anything, right? If something's bothering you, I want to know so I can help you." For a moment, it seemed that Emma was going to maintain her facade, but then, as if a dam had broken, the tears began to flow freely. "The kids at school, they're like the ones at the restaurant," she sobbed. "They say horrible things, Dad, about you, about me, about Mom." Jack felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. The revelation that his daughter had been suffering in silence, not only that night at the restaurant but also at school, filled him with a mixture of guilt and rage. "Oh, Emma," he murmured, pulling her into a protective embrace. "I'm so sorry, I should have noticed sooner." As he held his daughter, letting her cry on his shoulder, Jack realized how far he had strayed from what really mattered. He had been so focused on building an empire, on being the best in business, that he had neglected his most important role, being a father. "I promise things are going to change," he said with determination, pulling back slightly to look Emma in the eyes. "I won't let anyone hurt you like this again." Emma looked at him with a mixture of hope and doubt. "But Dad, how? You can't be with me all the time. And they're the children of your friends, of your partners." Emma's words were like a revelation to Jack. The world he had built, the social circle they belonged to, suddenly seemed empty and superficial. What good was all his success if he couldn't protect his own daughter from the cruelty that existed in that very world? "You're right. I can't be with you all the time," Jack admitted. "But I can teach you to be strong, to not let their words hurt you. And more importantly, I can show you that there are things much more valuable than money or social status." At that moment, Jack made a decision that would change the course of their lives. It wouldn't be an instant transformation, but it was the beginning of a path that would lead them both to rediscover what it really meant to be part of the Thornton family. "How about you skip school tomorrow, and we spend the day together?" Jack proposed, an idea forming in his mind. "I have something important to show you." Emma's eyes lit up with a mixture of surprise and excitement. "Really? Don't you have to work?" Jack smiled, feeling as if a weight had lifted from his shoulders. "Nothing is more important than you, Emma. It's time I show you that." That night, while Emma slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Jack stayed awake, planning. He was not only thinking about how to strengthen his relationship with his daughter, but also how to address the bigger problem, the toxic environment in which they had been living. He knew it wouldn't be easy, The same circles that had provided him with his fortune and status were now threatening his daughter's happiness and well-being. He would have to be careful, strategic, but also determined. As he looked out the window of his study, observing the lights of the city spread out before him, Jack Thornton felt he was on the verge of something big. It wasn't just about protecting Emma, but about redefining his own values and perhaps changing the mindset of an entire social class. With this resolution in mind, Jack finally went to sleep, preparing for the day that would mark the beginning of his personal transformation and that of his daughter. What he didn't know was that his actions would soon trigger a series of events that would shake the foundations of high society, exposing long-kept secrets and testing loyalties that were believed to be unbreakable. Dawn found Jack Thornton, already awake and ready for the day he had planned. He dressed casually, something unusual for him, and headed to Emma's room. He found her already awake, sitting on her bed with an expression of anticipation mixed with curiosity. "Good morning, Princess," Jack greeted with a warm smile. "Ready for our adventure?" Emma nodded enthusiastically, jumping out of bed. "Where are we going, Dad?" "It's a surprise," Jack replied with a wink. "But first, dress in something comfortable. No fancy dresses today." While Emma got ready, Jack made a few quick calls, cancelling all his meetings for the day. His assistant sounded perplexed, but Jack was firm. Today, his priority was his daughter. An hour later, father and daughter left their luxurious mansion in a modest rented car. Instead of their usual limousine, Emma looked out the window with curiosity as they drove away from the exclusive neighborhoods that had always been her home. "Dad, why are we going in this car?" Emma asked, noticing the difference. Jack smiled, keeping his eyes on the road. "Because today we're going to see a different part of the city, honey, a part we don't know very well." After almost an hour of driving, they arrived at a humble neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The streets were full of life, children playing on the sidewalks, street vendors offering their products, and neighbors chatting animatedly. Jack parked the car in front of a worn but clean building. A faded sign announced, "Hope Community Center." "What is this place, Dad?" Emma asked as they got out of the car. "It's a very special place," Jack replied. "They help people here who don't have as many things as we do." As they entered, they were greeted by Maria, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile and kind eyes. "Mr. Thornton, what a surprise to have you here. And this must be little Emma Welcome." Jack greeted Maria with familiarity, surprising Emma. "Maria, thank you for receiving us on such short notice. I wanted to show Emma the work you do here." Maria nodded understandingly. "Of course, we're just preparing lunch for the neighborhood children. Would you like to help?" Emma looked at her father, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd love to," the girl said shyly. Soon, Emma found herself in the center's kitchen, helping to prepare sandwiches alongside other volunteers. At first, she felt out of place, but gradually began to enjoy the task. Jack, meanwhile, helped organize donations of clothes and books. During lunch, Emma sat with the neighborhood children. At first, she was nervous, but soon realized that these children treated her with kindness, regardless of her last name or her brand name clothes. "Do you want to play with us afterwards?" asked a girl named Lucy. Of the same age, Emma looked at her father, who smiled and nodded. "I'd love to," she replied with a genuine smile. As Emma played in the center's courtyard, Jack watched her from the window. Maria approached him. "She's a wonderful girl," she commented. "She has a generous heart, like yours." Jack sighed. "I've been so busy building an empire that I almost forgot what really matters. I want Emma to understand that there's more to life than money and social status." Maria nodded understandingly. "It's a valuable lesson, and it's never too late to learn it or teach it." At the end of the day, as they were driving home, Emma was unusually quiet. "What are you thinking about, honey?" Jack asked Emma. Looked at him with eyes full of new understanding. "Dad, those kids don't have many things, but they seemed very happy, and they were very kind to me even though they didn't know me." Jack smiled, feeling a mixture of pride and relief. "That's because true wealth, Emma, isn't in the things we have, but in how we treat others and in the experiences we share." "Can we come back another day?" Emma asked hopefully. "Of course we can," Jack replied. In fact, I was thinking we could go regularly. How does that sound?" Emma's face lit up with a smile, the most genuine Jack had seen in a long time. That night, as he tucked Emma in, Jack noticed a change in his daughter. There was a new light in her eyes, a confidence that wasn't there before. "Dad," Emma said just before Jack turned off the light, "I think I understand now what Mom used to say about being a true Thornton." "And what's that, honey?" Jack asked, curious. "That it's not about how much money we have or what others think of. So as it's about how we treat others and doing the right thing." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. "Your mother would be very proud of you, Emma. I certainly am." As he closed the door to Emma's room, Jack realized that this day had not only been a lesson for his daughter, but also for himself. He had rediscovered a part of himself that he had forgotten in his pursuit of success and power. However, as he headed to his study, Jack knew that the road ahead would not be easy. Changing his priorities would mean facing ingrained expectations and, possibly, resistance from those in his social and business circle. Sitting at his desk, Jack began to outline a plan, not only to help more actively at the Hope Community Center, but also to reevaluate his businesses and relationships. He wanted to ensure that everything he did from now on reflected the values he wanted to instill in Emma. What Jack didn't know was that his actions would soon catch the attention of those who preferred to maintain the status quo. And among the shadows of high society, alliances and plots were already forming to protect the secrets that Jack's new path threatened to expose. The weeks following the visit to the Hope Community Center marked a notable change in the Thorntons' lives. Jack, true to his word, began to reorganize his schedule to spend more time with Emma and to become more involved in community projects. This change did not go unnoticed in high society circles. One afternoon, while Jack was working in his office in the city center, he received an unexpected visit. Ernest Miller, one of his oldest and most powerful partners, entered without announcing himself, his face a mask of barely disguised concern. "Jack, old friend," Ernest greeted, his tone forcedly jovial. "Do you have a moment?" Jack looked at him with surprise but nodded, indicating that he should take a seat. "Of course, Ernest. What brings you here?" Ernest settled into the chair in front of Jack's desk, his gaze scanning the office before fixing on his host. "I've been hearing some rumors, Jack, worrying rumors." "Rumors?" Jack asked, raising an eyebrow. "About what exactly?" Ernest leaned forward, lowering his voice as if afraid of being overheard. "They say you've been canceling important meetings, declining invitations to crucial events, and most alarmingly, you've been seen in, well, less than recommendable neighborhoods." Jack maintained a neutral expression, although inside he felt a mixture of irritation and determination. "I didn't know my personal activities were a topic of conversation, Ernest." "Come on, Jack," Ernest insisted with a forced laugh. "You know as well, as I do that in our world, everything is a topic of conversation. People talk, and what they say can affect businesses, reputations." "And what exactly is it that worries you, Ernest?" Jack asked, his tone becoming colder. Ernest sighed, as if it cost him to say what came next. "Look, some of our associates are uneasy. They fear that your new activities might compromise certain agreements, certain sensitive information." Jack slowly stood up, his gaze fixed on Ernest. "Let me be clear, Ernest. My priorities have changed, it's true, but my integrity remains intact. I have no intention of compromising anything or anyone." "But Jack," Ernest insisted, also standing up, "you have to understand, the world we move in is delicate. One misstep, one word out of place, and everything we've worked for could crumble." Jack rounded his desk, approaching Ernest. "Is that a threat, Ernest?" Ernest stepped back slightly, raising his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "Of course not, my friend. It's a warning, from an old friend who's concerned. Just be careful, Jack. Not everyone will view your new activities favorably." With those words, Ernest said goodbye and left the office, leaving Jack immersed in his thoughts. Ernest's visit had confirmed his suspicions. His change in attitude and priorities was causing ripples in the murky waters of high society. That night during dinner, Jack observed Emma, noticing how his daughter seemed more animated and self-assured since they began their regular visits to the community center. "Dad," Emma said suddenly, pulling Jack from his thoughts, "can we invite Lucy over someday?" Jack blinked, surprised. "Lucy? The girl from the community center?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, she's my new friend. She taught me how to play hopscotch, and I taught her how to make bracelets. She's very fun." Jack smiled, feeling a mixture of pride and concern. "Of course, honey. We can invite her whenever you want." As Emma continued talking animatedly about her new friend, Jack couldn't help but think about the conversation with Ernest. How would his associates react if they knew he was considering inviting the daughter of a working-class family to his mansion? Later that night, after putting Emma to bed, Jack retired to his study. Sitting in his leather armchair, with a glass of whiskey in hand, he began to reflect on the events of the past few weeks. On one hand, he saw the positive change in Emma, how she was becoming a more confident and compassionate girl. On the other hand, there were Ernest's veiled threats and the growing tension in his social and business circle. Jack knew he was at a crossroads. He could step back, return to his old life of carefree luxury and unscrupulous business, or he could move forward, facing the consequences of challenging the status quo. As he contemplated his options, his eyes fell on a photo of his late wife. He remembered her words, "A true Thornton doesn't bend to pressure but stands firm in their convictions." With a sigh, Jack made a decision. Not only would he continue on his new path, but he would do so with more determination than ever. If the world in which he had lived for so long couldn't accept this change, then perhaps it was time to change that world. What Jack didn't know was that his decision would set in motion a series of events that would shake the foundations of high society, exposing long-held secrets and testing loyalties that were believed unbreakable. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Ernest Miller met secretly with a select group of businessmen and influential figures. The topic of discussion: how to handle the Thornton problem before it got out of control. The battle of wills was about to begin, and no one, not even Jack, could foresee the consequences that his actions would have on the lives of all involved. The sun had barely begun to peek over the horizon when Jack Thornton arrived at the Hope Community Center. This time, however, he didn't come alone to help or spend time with Emma. He had a more ambitious mission in mind. Maria, the center's director, greeted him with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Mr. Thornton, we weren't expecting you so early. Is everything all right?" Jack nodded, a clear determination in his eyes. "Maria, I need your help. I want to do more for the center and for this neighborhood, much more." Over the next few hours, Jack and Maria discussed ambitious plans, expanding the center, creating job training programs, improving the neighborhood's educational facilities. Jack was willing to invest not only money, but also his time and connections. "This is incredible, Jack," said Maria, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the proposals. "But are you sure? This could cause complications in your world." Jack smiled, a mixture of defiance and resolution on his face. "My world needs a change, Maria, and I think this is the place to start." Meanwhile, at the exclusive Blue Sky Club, Ernest Miller was meeting with a select group of the city's elite. Among those present were Alexander Vega, media magnate, Isabella Foster, prominent political figure, and Charles Howard, Supreme Court judge. "Gentlemen, madam," Ernest began, his grave voice resonating in the private room. "We have a problem. Jack Thornton is deviating from the path." "Deviating?" asked Isabella, arching a perfectly lined eyebrow. "Explain yourself, Ernest." Ernest proceeded to detail Jack's recent activities, his visits to the marginal neighborhood, his growing interest in community projects, and his apparent disinterest in the businesses and social events he used to prioritize. "This could be problematic," murmured Charles, the judge, exchanging significant looks with the others. Alexander Vega, the media magnate, leaned forward, his eyes shining with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "How much does Jack know? Is there a risk that he might expose something?" Ernest shook his head. "I don't think he knows anything concrete yet. But if he continues down this path, digging in areas that should remain buried, then we must stop him, sentenced Isabella, her voice cold and calculating. The question is, how? While the elite group conspired in the luxurious club, Jack returned to his office, energized by his meeting with Maria. Upon entering, he was surprised to find his assistant, Laura, waiting for him with a concerned expression. "Mr. Thornton, you have a visitor. He says it's urgent." Intrigued, Jack entered his office to find an unexpected figure, Richard Martinez, an investigative journalist known for his reports on corporate corruption. "Mr. Thornton," Richard greeted, standing up. "I appreciate you seeing me without an appointment." Jack shook the journalist's hand, his curiosity increasing. "How can I help you, Mr. Martinez?" Richard looked around before speaking, lowering his voice. "I have information that might interest you about your associates." Over the next hour, Richard shared with Jack a series of documents and recordings that suggested a network of corruption involving several of the most prominent members of the city's elite, including Ernest Miller and the other conspirators at the Blue Sky Club. "Why are you showing me this?" Jack asked. Overwhelmed by the information, Richard looked at him intently. "Because you're changing, Mr. Thornton, and I believe you could be the ally we need to expose this entire network." Jack leaned back in his chair, his mind working at full speed. On one hand, the information Richard had provided was explosive and potentially destructive to many of the people he once considered friends and partners. On the other hand, it represented an opportunity to clean the city of the corruption that had plagued it for so long. "I need time to think," Jack finally said. This changes everything." Richard nodded understandingly. "I understand. But we don't have much time. I think they suspect I'm onto them. And if they find out I've talked to you..." The implication hung in the air, heavy and threatening. That night, as Jack had dinner with Emma, his mind was divided between the conversation with his daughter about her day at school and Richard's revelations. "Dad, are you okay?" Emma asked, noticing her father's distraction. "You seem worried." Jack forced a smile. "I'm fine, honey. Just thinking about some important decisions I have to make." Emma looked at him with wisdom beyond her years. "Mom always said that when you have to make a difficult decision, you should listen to your heart." Emma's words resonated deeply with Jack. He remembered why he had started all this change in the first place, to be a better father, to create a better world for his daughter. After putting Emma to bed, Jack retired to his study. He took out the documents Richard had given him and began to review them again. With each page he read, his resolve strengthened. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Richard, it's Jack Thornton. I'm in. What do you need me to do?" On the other side of the city, at the Blue Sky Club, Ernest Miller received an urgent call. "Mr. Miller, we have a problem. It seems Thornton has met with Richard Martinez." Ernest's face paled. "Gather the group now, things have just gotten complicated." As the night progressed, two forces prepared for an inevitable confrontation. On one side, Jack and his new and unexpected alliance with Richard Martinez. On the other, the elite group led by Ernest, willing to do whatever necessary to keep their secrets buried. What none of them knew was that their actions were about to unleash a series of events that would shake the very foundations of the city, exposing long-hidden truths and redefining loyalties that were believed unbreakable. And in the midst of all this, an 8-year-old girl slept peacefully, unaware of the whirlwind her father was about to unleash, all in the name of love and justice. The following days were a whirlwind of activity for Jack Thornton. In the mornings, he maintained his usual routine, breakfasts with Emma, taking her to school, and then heading to his office. But his afternoons and nights were now dedicated to a secret and dangerous purpose. In a small rented apartment in a discreet neighborhood, Jack met with Richard Martinez and a small team of trusted journalists and investigators. Together, they reviewed documents, analyzed recordings, and traced connections that revealed a network of corruption that extended far beyond what they had initially imagined. "This is bigger than we thought, Jack," Richard said one night, his face illuminated by his computer screen. "It doesn't just involve local businessmen and politicians. There are international connections, large-scale money laundering." Jack nodded gravely. I know, and with each passing day, I realize how much I've been part of this, even if indirectly. Don't be so hard on yourself, intervened Elena, a young journalist on the team. What's important is that you're doing the right thing now. Meanwhile, in the outside world, Jack's absence from social circles and corporate events did not go unnoticed. Rumors began to circulate, fueled by Ernest Miller's growing paranoia and his group. One afternoon, as Jack was picking Emma up from school, he noticed a black car that seemed to be following them. With his heart racing, he took an unexpected detour, confirming his suspicions when the vehicle continued behind them. Dad, why are we going this way? Emma asked, noticing the change of route. Jack forced a smile, trying to stay calm for his daughter's sake. I just wanted to take a different route today, honey. How about we go for ice cream? He managed to lose the car that was following them, but the incident left him deeply disturbed. That night, after making sure Emma was asleep, Jack called Richard. I think I'm being followed, he said quietly. We need to speed things up. Richard sighed on the other end of the line. I was afraid this would happen, Jack. Maybe you should consider sending Emma to a safe place for a while. The suggestion hit Jack like a punch to the stomach. The idea of separating from his daughter, even temporarily, caused him physical pain, but he knew Richard was right. Things were getting dangerous. The next day, Jack had a difficult conversation with Maria, the director of the Hope Community Center. Maria, I need to ask you a big favor, Jack began, his voice tense. Could you take care of Emma for a while, let's say a few weeks? Maria looked at him with concern. Jack, what's going on? You know I'd do anything for you and Emma, but this sounds serious. Jack told her an edited version of the situation, enough for her to understand the gravity without putting her in danger with too many details. Of course I'll take care of her, Maria finally said. But promise me you'll be careful, Jack. That girl needs you. That night, Jack had the most difficult conversation of his life with Emma. Honey, remember when we talked about doing the right thing, even when it's hard? Jack began, sitting on the edge of Emma's bed. Emma nodded, her big eyes fixed on her father. Yes, Dad, like when you decided to help more at the community center. Jack smiled sadly. Exactly. Well, now Dad is trying to do something very important and very right, but it could be a little dangerous for a while. Emma's eyes opened with alarm. Dangerous? Dad, what's going on? Don't worry, my love, Jack reassured her, though his heart was breaking. Everything will be all right, but to keep you safe, you're going to stay with Maria for a while. It'll be like a vacation at the community center. Emma threw herself into her father's arms, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. I don't want to leave you, Dad, I'm scared. Jack hugged her tightly, fighting back his own tears. I know, honey, I'm scared too, but sometimes doing the right thing means facing our fears. Do you remember what Mom used to say about being brave? Emma nodded against his chest. That being brave doesn't mean not being afraid, but doing the right thing despite the fear. Exactly, said Jack, pulling back slightly to look his daughter in the eyes. And you, my little Emma, are the bravest person I know. The next day, with a heavy heart, Jack took Emma to the Hope Community Center. As he watched his daughter walk away hand in hand with Maria, he felt as if a part of him was being torn away. But he knew it was necessary for Emma, for the memory of his wife, for the city he loved. He had to see this through to the end. Back in his car, Jack took a deep breath before dialing a number on his phone. Richard, I'm ready. It's time to make public everything we have. What Jack didn't know was that at that very moment, Ernest Miller and his group were putting their own desperate plan into motion to silence him. The final battle was about to begin, and the fate of many hung in the balance. The morning dawned gray and threatening, as if the sky itself sensed the storm that was about to break out in the city. Jack Thornton was in the newsroom of The Truth newspaper, along with Richard Martinez and his team of journalists. The atmosphere was tense, charged with anticipation and nervousness. Once we publish this, there's no turning back, Richard warned, his hand suspended over the keyboard, ready to send the article that would expose the corruption network. Jack nodded, his face a mask of determination. Do it, it's time for the truth to come to light. With a click, the article was published online, and the presses began to print the special edition of the newspaper. Within minutes, social media exploded with the news, and the main television networks interrupted their regular programming to cover the scandal. Meanwhile, at the exclusive Blue Sky Club, Ernest Miller and his group were meeting in an emergency session. "Damn it!" Ernest shouted, throwing a newspaper on the table. "How did we let this happen?" Isabella Foster, the politician, maintained an icy calm. "We need to control the damage, Alexander. Can you use your media contacts to discredit this story?" Alexander Vega, the media magnate, shook his head. "It's too late for that. The evidence is too solid. We need a more drastic strategy." Charles Howard, the judge, who had remained silent until now, spoke in a grave voice. "I have some contacts who could take care of Thornton." A heavy silence fell over the room. Finally, Ernest nodded slowly. "Do what's necessary. We can't allow this to continue." At the Hope Community Center, Maria watched the news with a mixture of pride and terror. Emma, sitting beside her, watched the image of her father on television with large, worried eyes. "Is my dad in danger?" the girl asked, her voice barely a whisper. Maria hugged Emma, trying to convey a confidence she herself didn't feel. "Your dad is a very brave man, Emma. He's doing the right thing." As the day progressed, the city plunged into controlled chaos. Spontaneous demonstrations broke out in front of the buildings of companies and government offices implicated in the scandal. The police, confused about how to proceed, given that some of their high-ranking officials were mentioned in the accusations, tried to maintain order as best they could. Jack, aware that his life was in danger, was constantly on the move, changing location every few hours. Richard and his team had established a network of safe houses throughout the city, and Jack jumped from one to another, always one step ahead of those who were looking for him. In one of these safe houses, Jack received an unexpected call. It was Laura, his assistant. "Mr. Thornton," Laura said, her voice trembling. "I just heard something terrible. I think they plan to harm Emma to get to you." Jack's heart stopped for a moment. "What? How do you know?" "I overheard Ernest Miller talking on the phone. He mentioned something about using the girl as leverage, Mr. Thornton. You have to protect her." Jack hung up the phone, his mind working at full speed. He knew he couldn't trust the police, not knowing how many of them might be involved in the corruption network. With his heart in his throat, he called Maria. "Maria, listen to me carefully," he said as soon as she answered. "You have to get Emma out of there right now. It's not safe." "Jack, what's going on?" Maria asked, alarmed. "There's no time to explain. Take her to this address." Jack gave her the details of one of the safe houses. "And Maria, thank you for everything." Meanwhile, at the Hope Community Center, Maria acted quickly. "Emma, honey, we have to go now." Emma, sensing the urgency in Maria's voice, didn't ask questions. They took only the essentials and left through the back door of the center. Just in time, for moments later, a group of menacing-looking men entered, through the front door asking about Jack Thornton's daughter. On the streets, the situation was becoming increasingly tense. Jack's revelations had touched a nerve in the population, unleashing years of accumulated frustration against corruption and inequality. What had begun as peaceful protests was beginning to turn violent in some areas. Ernest Miller and his group watched in horror as their world crumbled around them. Their phones wouldn't stop ringing, business partners cutting ties, politicians distancing themselves, journalists asking for comments. "This is getting out of hand," muttered Alexander Vega, watching images of the protests on television. Isabella Foster, always the strategist, intervened. "We need a scapegoat, someone to take all the blame." All eyes turned to Ernest. He looked at them, suddenly understanding his precarious position. "Don't you dare!" he began, but was interrupted by the sound of approaching sirens. Moments later, the police burst into the Blue Sky Club, but they weren't the corrupt officers they had expected to protect them. These were federal agents led by an anti-corruption unit that had been investigating in secret for months. "Ernest Miller," announced the leader of the unit, "you're under arrest on charges of corruption, fraud, and conspiracy." As they handcuffed Ernest, he shouted at his former allies, "You can't do this to me! We'll all fall together!" But his words fell on deaf ears. The group that had once controlled the city from the shadows, was now crumbling, each desperately trying to save themselves. In another part of the city, Jack finally reunited with Emma and Maria in the safe house. Upon seeing his daughter, Jack hugged her tightly, tears flowing freely down his face. "Dad, I was so scared," Emma sobbed. "I know, my love," Jack replied, stroking her hair. "I was too, but you're safe now. Everything's going to be all right now." Maria watched the scene with a mixture of relief and concern. "Jack, what happens now?" Jack looked up, his expression a mix of determination and hope. "Now, Maria, we rebuild. We clean up this city and make it better, fairer, for Emma and for all the children who deserve a better future." As night fell over the city, the protests began to calm down. News of the arrests and the promise of thorough investigations had appeased the population, at least for the moment. Jack knew that the road ahead would be difficult. Dismantling decades of corruption and changing an ingrained culture of inequality would not be an easy task. But looking at Emma, he remembered why he had started all this in the first place. "Dad," Emma said suddenly, "can we go back to the community center soon? I want to help like you do." Jack smiled, feeling a surge of pride and hope. "Of course we can, my love. In fact, I think we could all learn a lot by helping there." As the city slept, exhausted by the day's events, a new era was brewing, an era of transparency, justice, and hope. And at the center of it all was Jack Thornton, the man who had risked everything to do the right thing, inspired by love for his daughter and the desire to create a better world for her. The storm had passed, but the real work was just beginning. Reconstruction would be a challenge, but with the truth on his side and the support of people like Maria and Richard, Jack knew it was possible. The future, for the first time in a long time, looked bright. The months following the exposure of the corruption network were a whirlwind of activity for Jack Thornton, and the entire city society was in a state of transformation, with new anti-corruption laws being enacted, companies restructuring, and a renewed faith in justice blossoming among citizens. Jack, now viewed as a hero by many, divided his time between collaborating with authorities to dismantle the last vestiges of the corrupt network and his work at the Hope Community Center, which had become a symbol of the city's new direction. One sunny afternoon, as Jack supervised the expansion of the community center, now funded by donations from citizens inspired by his story, Emma approached him with a thoughtful expression. "Dad, can I ask you a question?" said the girl, her eyes reflecting a maturity acquired by recent experiences. "Of course, honey. What is it?" Jack replied, crouching down to be at her level. "Do you think Mom would be proud of us?" The question took Jack by surprise, feeling a lump in his throat. It had been a while since they had talked about Sarah, his late wife. "Oh, Emma," said Jack, hugging his daughter, "I'm sure your mother would be immensely proud, especially of you, my brave girl." That night, after tucking Emma in, Jack found himself reviewing old photo albums, the images of Sarah, smiling and full of life, awakened memories he had kept buried for a long time. One memory in particular caught his attention, a photo of Sarah in front of the old building of The Truth newspaper, where Richard now worked. Jack remembered that Sarah had been a journalist. Before their marriage, always passionate about uncovering the truth and fighting for justice. With a sudden inspiration, Jack called Richard. "Richard, I need you to investigate something for me," he said, as soon as his friend answered. "I want to know more about my wife Sarah's journalistic work before we got married." In the following days, as the city continued its process of healing and renewal, Jack immersed himself in Sarah's past. With Richard's help, he discovered that his wife had been working on an important investigation just before leaving her career. "Jack, this is incredible," Richard said one afternoon, rushing into Jack's office at the community center. "Sarah's notes, she was after the same corruption network that we exposed. She had pieces of the puzzle that took us months to discover." Jack was stunned. "But why did she never tell me? Why did she leave the investigation?" The answer came a few days later, in the form of a letter that Sarah had left in a safety deposit box, with instructions to be delivered to Jack if anything happened to her. With trembling hands, Jack opened the letter. "My dear Jack, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. There's something you need to know. The investigation I was working on before we got married, it was dangerous. I uncovered a corruption network that reached the highest levels of the city. When they threatened me, I decided to leave it all behind to protect you and our future family. But now I know it was a mistake. The truth always finds its way to the light. I ask for your forgiveness for not telling you before, and I hope that someday you find the strength to finish what I started. Always remember, love is stronger than fear, and the truth, though sometimes painful, is the path to freedom. With all my love, Sarah." Jack felt the world stop around him. Everything that had happened, everything he had done, suddenly took on new meaning. He had not only been fighting for a better future for Emma, but also, unknowingly, had been fulfilling Sarah's last wish. That night, Jack had a long conversation with Emma, sharing with her the truth about her mother and how her bravery had inspired, albeit indirectly, the recent events. "Your mother was a heroine, Emma," Jack said with tears in his eyes. "And now I understand why she always said that. Being a true Thornton meant doing the right thing, no matter the cost." Emma hugged her father, processing the information. "So, Mum has been watching over us all this time?" Jack nodded, feeling a mixture of pain and gratitude. "Yes, my love, and she'll continue to do so always." The following days brought a new wave of changes. Inspired by Sarah's legacy, Jack decided to establish a foundation in her name, dedicated to promoting investigative journalism and government transparency. Sarah's story, once made public, added a new dimension to the narrative of the city's transformation. It was no longer just the story of a businessman who decided to do the right thing, but the culmination of a dream shared by two people who loved each other and believed in a better world. As the city continued its process of renewal, Jack and Emma found new strength in Sarah's legacy. The community, center, the foundation, and every action they took was now imbued with a deeper purpose. One afternoon, as Jack and Emma planted a tree in the community center's garden in memory of Sarah, Emma looked at her father with a smile. "Dad, I think I understand now what it means to be a true Thornton," she said. "Oh yeah?" Jack replied, curious. "And what does it mean, honey?" "It means never forgetting where we come from, fighting for what's right, and always leaving the world a little better than we found it," Emma responded with conviction. Jack felt his heart swell with pride and love. "That's exactly what it means, my brave Emma. And as long as we remember that, your mother's legacy will live on forever." As the sun set over the transforming city, Jack and Emma remained together, planting seeds of hope, both literally and figuratively, for a brighter and fairer future. The road ahead would still be challenging, but with Sarah's memory guiding them and their mutual love strengthening them, they knew they could face any obstacle that came their way. As the months passed, the city experienced a remarkable transformation. Jack Thornton's anti-corruption initiatives backed by Sarah's newly discovered legacy were bearing visible fruit. However, as often happens with significant changes, not everyone was happy with the new direction society was taking. One morning, as Jack was reviewing plans for a new affordable housing project, he received an urgent call from Richard. "Jack, we have a problem," Richard said, his voice tense. "It seems that some of Ernest Miller's old allies are regrouping. They're trying to undermine our reform efforts." Jack frowned, feeling a familiar sense of unease. What exactly are they doing? They're using their remaining connections to block key legislation, spread misinformation, and more worryingly, they're trying to discredit your reputation. And the mention of Sarah made Jack clench his fist. Months had passed since the truth about her investigation came to light, and the idea of someone trying to tarnish her memory was unbearable to him. "We need to face this head-on," Jack said with determination. "Organize a press conference. It's time we speak directly to the people." The following days were a whirlwind of preparations. Jack worked tirelessly with Richard and his team to gather all the necessary evidence to counter the accusations that were being propagated. Meanwhile, at home, Emma noticed the growing tension in her father. "Dad, "Is everything okay?" she asked one night as they were having dinner. Jack tried to smile, but the weariness was evident in his eyes. "Yes, honey, I'm just a little worried about work." Emma looked at him with wisdom beyond her years. "It's the bad men again, isn't it? The ones who don't want the city to improve." Jack was surprised by his daughter's insight. "Yes, Emma, there are people who aren't happy with the changes we're making. But don't worry, we're going to solve it." "Can I help?" Emma asked, her eyes shining with determination. Jack smiled, this time genuinely. "In fact, I think you can. I have an idea." The day of the press conference arrived. The media gathered en masse in front of City Hall. Expectant rumors about possible revelations had been circulating for days. Increasing the anticipation, Jack took the podium, with Emma by his side. The presence of the girl caused murmurs of surprise among the journalists. "Good morning," Jack began. "I'm here today not just as Jack Thornton, the businessman or the activist, but as a regular citizen of this city and as a father. In recent months, we've seen great changes in our community, changes that many of you have supported and fought for. However, recently, voices have emerged seeking to discredit these efforts and return to the old ways of corruption and inequality." He paused, looking at Emma, who returned an encouraging smile. "But I'm not here today to defend myself. I'm here to remind us all why we started this journey in the first place. For our children, for our future. My late wife, Sarah, began this fight years ago, risking everything for the truth. And today, her daughter, our daughter, wants to tell you something." Jack stepped away from the microphone, giving way to Emma. The girl stood on tiptoes to reach the microphone, her clear and firm voice resonating in the square. "My name is Emma Thornton," she began, "and I want to tell you about the city I dream of. A city where all children have a safe home, where they can go to school without fear, where their parents have fair jobs, a city where no one has to hide or lie to be safe." The journalists listened in silence, captivated by the sincerity and vision of the little girl. "I know there are people who want things to go back to the way they were before," Emma continued. "But I ask you, is that what you want for your children, for your grandchildren? My mum and dad taught me that being brave doesn't mean not being afraid, but doing the right thing despite the fear. So I ask you, be brave with us. Help us build this city that we all deserve." When Emma finished, a momentary silence was followed by thunderous applause. Jack, with tears in his eyes, hugged his daughter. Aware that he had just witnessed a historic moment in the days that followed, Emma's speech went viral. The image of the little girl speaking with such passion and clarity about a better future touched people's hearts in a way that no political speech could have done. Public support for Jack's reforms strengthened attempts to discredit him, lost strength in the face of the honesty and hope represented by Emma. Even some of the former opponents began to reconsider their positions. However, not everything was rosy. One night, as Jack and Emma were returning from the community center, they noticed that someone had spray-painted graffiti on their front door. "Traitors" was written in large red letters. Emma clung to her father's hand. "Dad, why would someone do this?" Jack sighed, hugging his daughter. "Because change scares some people, honey, but we won't let this stop us, right?" Emma shook her head, her determination evident. "No, we won't. Mom wouldn't have given up, and neither will we." The next day, instead of simply cleaning off the graffiti, Jack and Emma invited neighbors and children from the community center to paint a mural on the door. The result was a colorful representation of the city of their dreams, full of hope and unity. As they worked on the mural, more and more people joined in, bringing food, music, and most importantly, their support. What had begun as an act of vandalism turned into a community celebration. Richard, who had joined the activity, approached Jack. "You know, I think we just found our new campaign strategy." Jack looked at him, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Instead of fighting against negativity, we're going to drown it out with positivity, community murals, cleanup events, mentoring programs. Let's make people not just dream of a better city, but actively participate in its creation." Jack smiled, watching Emma laugh as she painted with other children. You know, I think you're right, and I think I know the perfect ambassador for this movement. In the months that followed, the city experienced a revolution of color and hope. Murals bloomed in previously forgotten neighborhoods, community programs sprang up on every corner, and people began to take an active role in transforming their environment. Emma, with her boundless energy and clear vision, became the face of this new movement. Her innocence and determination inspired young and old alike. And although challenges continued, the resistance of those who opposed change met with an even more powerful force, the collective hope of a city that had rediscovered its heart. Jack, observing all of this, couldn't help but think of Sarah. "We did it, love," he whispered one night, looking at the stars. "Not in the way we expected, but we did it. The city was far from perfect, but it was on its way, and with each stroke of color, each act of kindness, each new community initiative, it came a little closer to the dream that Sarah had had, that Jack had continued, and that Emma now led into the future." As the transformation of the city progressed, driven by Jack's vision and Emma's contagious enthusiasm, new challenges emerged on the horizon. Progress, although welcome by many, brought with it unexpected consequences that threatened to destabilize the delicate balance they had achieved. One morning, as Jack was reviewing reports from the latest urban renewal project, Richard burst into his office, his face tense with concern. "Jack, we have a problem," he said, placing a stack of documents on the desk. "The new transparency policies and development projects are causing an exodus of some important companies. They're threatening to take thousands of jobs with them if we don't soften some of the regulations." Jack frowned, flipping through the documents. "We can't turn back now, Richard. We've come too far." "I know," Richard replied, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "But people are starting to worry if we lose those jobs, we could face an economic crisis." Jack leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. They had fought so hard to clean the city of corruption, but at what cost? Were they trading one problem for another? That night, during dinner, Emma noticed the concern on her father's face. "Dad, what's wrong? You look sad." Jack tried to smile, but Emma had developed a skill for seeing through his facades. "It's complicated, honey. Sometimes doing the right thing has difficult consequences." Emma looked at him thoughtfully. "Like when we had to move from the community center to keep me safe. It was hard, but it turned out okay in the end." Jack felt a surge of pride for his daughter's wisdom. "Exactly. But this time, a lot of people could lose their jobs if we go ahead with our plans." Emma frowned, processing the information. "But Dad, didn't you say those companies weren't playing fair? Isn't it better to have fewer jobs, but good jobs?" Emma's words resonated in Jack's mind. She was right, of course, but reality was more complicated than that. However, his daughter's perspective reminded him why they had started all this in the first place. The next day, Jack called an emergency meeting with his team and community leaders. The tension in the room was palpable as Jack explained the situation. "We can't back down on our reforms," he finally declared, "but we also can't ignore the economic impact. We need to find a solution that keeps our principles intact while ensuring the well-being of our citizens." Over the next few weeks, Jack and his team worked tirelessly on a new plan. They proposed incentives for companies that adhered to the new ethical standards, retraining programs for workers in transitioning industries, and an initiative to attract new businesses committed to social responsibility. However, not everyone was convinced. Protests began to emerge, some in favor of staying the course, others demanding a return to old practices out of fear of unemployment. In the midst of this tumult, Emma had an idea. "Dad, what if we make people see what the city would be like if we keep going forward? Like when we painted the mural on our door." Inspired by his daughter's suggestion, Jack launched a massive visualization campaign. Using augmented reality and interactive exhibits, they showed citizens what the city would look like in 5, 10, and 20 years if they maintained their current course. The campaign was a resounding success. People were able to walk through the streets of a clean, prosperous, and fair future city. They saw parks where polluting factories once stood, modern schools in previously forgotten neighborhoods, and a diversified economy that didn't depend on corrupt practices. Public support swung back in favor of the reforms, but Jack knew that words and images wouldn't be enough. They needed tangible and quick results. In a bold move, Jack decided to use a large part of his personal fortune to establish an economic transition fund. This fund would help workers affected by the changes, finance ethical startups, and support local small businesses. "It's risky," Richard warned him. "You could lose everything." Jack smiled, thinking of Sarah and the future they were building for Emma. Some risks are worth taking. The following months were a whirlwind of activity. The city became a hotbed of innovation and change. Old factories were transformed into incubators for clean tech companies. Education and training programs flourished in every neighborhood. The economy, after a period of uncertainty, began to show signs of recovery and sustainable growth. However, the price of progress was high. Jack worked long hours, often coming home exhausted. Emma, although proud of her father's achievements, began to feel his absence. One night, Jack came home to find Emma waiting for him, with a serious expression on her face. "Dad, we need to talk," the girl said, sounding surprisingly adult. Jack sat down, worried. "What's wrong, honey?" "I'm proud of everything you're doing," Emma began, "but I miss you. And I think you miss just being my dad sometimes too." Emma's words hit Jack like a punch to the stomach. He realized that in his eagerness to build a better future, he had been neglecting the present. "You're right, Emma," Jack said, pulling his daughter in for a hug. "I've been so focused on changing the city that I almost forgot the most important thing: our family." That night marked another turning point. Jack began to delegate more responsibilities, to trust his team more, and to reserve sacred time for Emma. Together, they resumed their regular visits to the community center, their board game nights, and their conversations about Emma's dreams for the future. As the city continued its transformation, the anniversary of Sarah's death approached. Jack and Emma, although busy with their respective responsibilities, felt the weight of the date approaching. One afternoon, while reviewing old family photos, Emma found an image that caught her attention. It was a photograph of Sarah in front of an abandoned building, holding a sign that said, "Future Community Arts Center." "Dad, what's this?" Emma asked, showing Jack the photo. Jack took the photograph, a mixture of nostalgia and surprise on his face. "This was a project your mother was working on before she left us. She wanted to turn that old building into an arts center for kids from disadvantaged neighborhoods. She never got to realize it." Emma looked at the photo and then at her father, a spark of determination in her eyes. "What if we make it happen, Dad? As a gift for Mom?" Emma's idea ignited something in Jack. They did some research and discovered that the building was still abandoned, forgotten amidst all the changes the city had experienced. With renewed energy, Jack and Emma embarked on the mission of making Sarah's dream a reality. They contacted local artists, educators, and community leaders. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many offering their time and resources for the project. However, not everything was easy. The building needed extensive repairs, and costs threatened to exceed the initial budget. Additionally, some neighbors expressed concerns about the increased traffic and noise that an arts center might bring to the area. Jack and Emma were not discouraged. They organized community meetings, listened to neighbors' concerns, and worked on collaborative solutions. Emma, with her natural charisma, became the face of the project, speaking passionately about how art could transform lives and communities. As Sarah's death anniversary approached, the project faced its biggest challenge. A group of developers, seeing the potential of the area now that the city was improving, made an offer to buy the building and surrounding land to build luxury condominiums. The offer was tempting for the city council, who saw an opportunity to increase tax revenues. Jack found himself once again in a difficult position, fighting against the same types of interests he once represented. It was Emma who proposed the solution. "Dad, what if we make the arts center more than just for kids? What if we include spaces for local artists to sell their work, classes for adults, and maybe even a small cafe? That way it could generate income and be self-sustainable." Emma's idea was the turning point. With a revised business plan that demonstrated the economic viability of the project, in addition to its social value, Jack managed to convince the City Council to approve the Sarah Thornton Arts Centre. On the anniversary of Sarah's death, instead of a somber ceremony, the city witnessed the grand opening of the centre. The building, once abandoned and forgotten, now shone with colourful murals, its hallways filled with children's laughter and the sound of music and creation. Jack and Emma cut the inaugural ribbon together, surrounded by friends, family and community members, Richard, Maria from the community centre, and many others who had been part of their journey were there to celebrate. "Your mother would be so proud," Jack said to Emma, with tears in his eyes as they watched children explore the new facilities. Emma squeezed her father's hand. "I know, Dad, I can feel her here with us." In the months that followed, the Sarah Thornton Arts Centre became a beacon of creativity and hope in the city. Children who had never had access to art education discovered hidden talents. Local artists found a space to exhibit and sell their work. The cafe became a popular meeting point, fostering community connections. But beyond its direct impact, the centre symbolized something bigger. It was a testament to how dreams, even those interrupted, could take on new life. It was a reminder that positive change, though difficult and sometimes painful, was possible. For Jack, the centre represented the culmination of a journey that had begun years ago when he decided to do the right thing, inspired by love for his daughter and the memory of his wife. He saw in every brushstroke, in every musical note, in every smile of the children who passed through its doors, Sarah's living legacy. And for Emma, the centre was a fulfilled promise and a new beginning. She had helped make her mother's dream a reality, and in the process had discovered her own passion for art and community service. She spent much of her free time at the centre, teaching younger children and developing her own artistic skills one afternoon. As Jack watched Emma guide a group of children in an art project, he realized that Sarah's true legacy wasn't the building or the programs, but the spirit of compassion, creativity and courage she had passed on to their daughter. The Sarah Thornton Arts Centre became a symbol of the city's transformation, a tangible reminder that a dream nurtured with love and determination could flourish even in the most unexpected places. And for Jack and Emma, it was a home away from home, a place where past, present and future intertwined in a beautiful symphony of colour and hope.